You are listening to The Exchange by Evolution, a melting pot of ideas and inspirations shared by some of the most successful technical leaders in the APAC region. I'm Pearlie, Associate Consultant with Evolution Recruitment Solutions, and I help connect businesses with top tech talents. Today, I'm your host. Just a disclaimer before we get into the discussion. All thoughts and views spoken by the speaker or myself are only representing each individual and not that of their company. Welcome to another installment of our podcast. On today's podcast, we'll be discussing the topic of nurturing a growth mindset and embracing leadership opportunity in tech. I'm delighted to be joined by Qanit, Chief Information Officer of Asia Market at Liberty Insurance. To begin, it would be great for Qanit to give a brief introduction of himself.
Awesome. Thank you, Pearlie, for having me. So I'm Qanit, as you called out. So I've been in Singapore for almost 6 years now. Originally moved here from the US. I've been in the insurance industry for about just north of 12 years. So it's been quite a journey, predominantly in tech. I actually started or graduated college as an electronics engineer. And then started as a software tester in Warner Brothers in California.
Okay.
Then moved on to the insurance industry. I work for Liberty Mutual. And as you called out, I'm playing actually two hats. I do architecture and engineering for the region. And then, lending my hat as a CIO for the Asia market here.
I see. Thank you so much for the introduction. So actually, what made you take the leap from electronics engineering to, insurance industry?
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, you learn how to program in electronics or electrical engineer. So when you come out of college, there's always you have a lot of aspirations and a lot of goals that I'm going to work at Google or Microsoft, but a lot of it is built on just basic need to kind of work at a big organization and be part of a big thing, right? But everyone has their own career trajectory. So when I came out of college, I think I was a lot more attracted to traveling. While, being obviously in tech or learning electronics at school, I was geared towards, getting my hands dirty while coding, whether it was software or hardware, right? But I was looking for opportunities that enabled me to travel. And so the first jump was, hey, Warner Brothers in California. So I went to school in Michigan. And so that was a nice little move away from the cold climate to California, sunny California, right? So I did software testing there. So I took on, whatever was tech related, as long as I liked the location and what it had to offer. And then I got approached by Liberty, and they're based out of Boston. So I hadn't explored much of the US or those cities. And so it seemed like a good opportunity at that time, and it did turn out to be. But what I really liked about what they had to offer was a development program that had international experience baked in it. So I really took it on, not for insurance, I took it on for the travel it had to offer and a development program that was offering like different roles in the organization. You become a developer, you do project management, and the prospect of perhaps doing that internationally. And since then, I've held travel as a personal hobby, but also taken on roles that have enabled that as well.
Yeah.
And that's one thing, working for a global multinational company like Liberty, I got a lot of opportunity to fulfill that goal and visit a lot of countries. I worked in China about 10 years ago for about 6-7 months. That was a very fulfilling experience.
In Chengdu, right?
In next to Chengdu, in Chongqing. Yeah, very spicy food. But not in Singapore, so you can find Sichuan cuisine everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So
exactly. Yeah, it's been quite a ride, right? 12 over years to Liberty.
Yes.
Right. Okay, thank you so much, for joining us today. All right, let's start with, the fundamental question of defining what's a growth mindset and how can professionals foster a growth mindset and embrace a culture of continuous learning in their tech careers. What do you think?
Yeah, great question. Very broad as well, right? So, growth mindset is a term that's quite popular these days, right? And rightly so, especially in career conversations, right? So let's first look at what it means. And to do that, we have to kind of contrast it with what a fixed mindset is as well, right? So often people interpret growth mindset as being open-minded or being inclusive. And that's I would like to say a common misconception because there's more to that. So these are definitely accurate attributes to what a growth mindset is. But it really looks at beyond just being open-minded and inclusive. It's about understanding where are we trying to go? Like what is our eventual outcome or goal, right? And the process or the journey that leads to it, right? And that second piece, understanding how that works, is growth mindset, and understanding how to change that or tweak it is growth mindset, right? In contrast, a fixed mindset accepts the process to achieve a goal and is relatively not welcome to change for the process or the journey that reaches that goal or achieves that goal, right? But still quite broad terms. So let's take a look at some examples, especially in like the tech industry or with tech professionals.
Absolutely.
So if we imagine a project team of engineers and product owners, and they're launching a new product or going for a release, right? And there's a due date. Everyone's gearing towards it. But imagine if that gets delayed, or they're not able to go live or release the product on that date because there was a misconfiguration by a cloud engineer on one of the servers. Hypothetical example. Happens every day in the tech industry with engineers, they'll have examples of that. So really a growth mindset then is about looking at not just like what caused that, right? Was it the cloud engineer? Were they knowledgeable of the configuration? What was the process that led to that delay, right? Did we need extra cloud engineers, for example? Or could that task have been automated to reduce human error, right? So growth mindset would be an engineer that starts questioning why that led to that event and how to improve it, right? In contrast, a fixed mindset would be, the cloud engineer missed the configuration. Now we have to reschedule the deployment, right? Which is true cause of the event, but not looking beyond that. Like, how do we solve for that problem? How do we get to that state? Are we staffed enough? Do we need more support so that we don't repeat the same mistake again, right? So that's one key point of having a growth mindset, that everyone on the team should be thinking about, whether it was their task or not. The developer, the front-end developer, they should be thinking about it as well, right? Another example, if you take it up a notch, is, let's imagine the team actually delivered the product, went live, and then start focusing on their next piece of task, right? But the product is not being used. If it's an application, customers are not using it, there's no adoption, right? So a fixed mindset is, okay, I did my job and I released the product and I did it perfectly, and they could be very specialized in it and they must have made a really good product. But not asking the question, like, why is it not being used? Is it delivering the eventual value that our team was set out to do, right? A growth mindset would be inquisitive about, is this product doing what it was supposed to do, and the effort that I put in to do it, to build it, is that returning value towards it, right? And often people will say, okay, that's the project manager's job or the product owner's job or the sponsor's job, right? But as tech professionals, even if we're an engineer, a tester, like we should have that mindset of understanding the big picture and learning things around that big picture to see where we're going as a team, as a system, right? And that's really what growth mindset and continuous learning is about, and having that point of view, basically.
Definitely. Those are really good points and examples. You basically summarize the growth mindset as having, I guess, looking at things from different vantage points, and obviously from a more macro point of view, right? And not just, I guess, depend on one situation itself. Okay, cool. And are there any, specific learning methodologies or approaches that are, I guess, particularly effective for tech professionals?
Yeah, and you'll hear, different point of views on this, on how to go about learning or how to develop oneself, right? But a lot of them, I think, can distill to a basic fundamental point, which is being curious, right? Because being curious can lead to understanding the bigger picture, as I said, right? And so just relating back to like this example, understanding the ins and outs of what we're here to do, right? If I'm an engineer, my product backlog says I need to build the story. That I do, but why am I building, right? And always having that at the back of your mind. Obviously not obsessing over it and not doing that versus your actual current task at hand. But I think, having that switch on being curious and understanding the big picture helps one fit the pieces or connect the dots together as they go through a project or several projects, or as they go through their career in a company, okay? And that has a subconscious effect on just once you start realizing how different bits and pieces fit together, then you start investigating more, and then you start enriching your experience in other areas, right? So fundamental methodology would be always be curious, even if it's not your task at hand, right? And the second piece to that, but related to, is always try to answer the why. Right? And note, I'm not saying ask the why. So a lot of times people say ask the why. Right?
Yeah.
And there's a subtle difference here, as you can tell. And it's really to, first be able to do self reflection on, why is my team doing this? Why is the company doing this? Why are we building a mobile app for whoever the user base is, right? And before asking that why, like, the answer is in front of you in different bits and pieces. When you talk to the project manager, they'll explain what the KPIs for the app is. Yeah. When you hear the sponsor speak about it, they'll explain what customers they're targeting. When you talk to your peers or your testers or, whoever else is in the project, they'll have different bits and pieces of the answer of why we're doing this. And so really collating that first in your head, and really understanding, like, why am I building this? Is a very good, again, switch to have in the back of your head. And then validate that with the team. And then ask them, why are we doing this? And see if your assumption is on par, or maybe there's areas that are missing. And that's a fundamental practice, regardless of where we are, what projects we're doing, what role we're playing. Being curious and asking or answering why really leads to a growth.
Definitely, I do agree, because a lot of people just work on projects without knowing why they're doing it. What was the fundamental reason that they're working on certain things? And without the why, it makes their work kind of feel meaningless, right? Yep. Yeah, and at the same time, I think it's very important to kind of form your own whys, right? Like you mentioned. Yeah, those are really good points. And, can you share some experiences of how, like ongoing learning and personal development can fuel career advancement in the tech industry?
Yeah, and thanks for asking that. Related to the point on being curious, right? I think technology, as you would agree, it's very fast moving, right?
Yes. So fluid.
It changes, and it's exponentially changing, and it will continue changing, right? So I think a very basic concept is staying up to date, right?
Yeah.
And it's easier said than done sometimes because there's a lot of play. You have your day job. But from my experience, what I like to do is get a little bit of I prefer breadth of exposure versus depth of exposure when I'm trying to span the technology domain, right? And depth is important as well, for sure. I'm not saying we shouldn't go deep into our area of expertise. We definitely should. And so when I was a software engineer, I was coding Java. I would go very deep into understanding and staying up to date on what the new Java frameworks are, libraries are, etc.
Yeah.
But that's one piece, and you have to kind of come out and like have breadth of knowledge across technology. What's happening in the industry. AI and ML have been big in the past few years. Staying up to date to that, but also like understanding what, especially in like tech, you kind of have different groupings of people, right? You're like, oh, I'm a .NET shop, I'm a Java shop, I'm AWS and Google.
Yeah.
And what often people find themselves doing is they start focusing just on that tech stack and not looking at other tech stacks. And rightly so for some reasons, like it helps them advance in that specific area and they progress further, right? But what I found myself doing is exploring the other tech stacks as well, right? And then also looking at how is tech helping outside of the tech industry, the businesses that it enables. And so I come from an insurance company, right? So tech isn't the product. Insurance is the product. Tech is a enabler, right? And so while widening my exposure to all the technology that's out there, it's also important to kind of understand how tech enables the business, right? And that comes with basically surrounding yourself with people that understand the business, right? And not just limiting myself on the IT floor and doing the project. It's talking to the claims handlers, talking to the the finance staff or the underwriters on just their day-to-day business, right? But also just conversing more on technology with them, or what their pain points are, what their challenges are. And at first it sounds like I'm investing a lot of time in interacting with a lot of people, but there is a learning that comes out of it. Again, there's learning is, primary learning is what you're reading from a book or watching a video. Secondary learning is what you're absorbing from your conversations and your interactions. And it's really the secondary learning that, embeds and you start connecting the dots when you're thinking about something in the shower or when you're trying to go to sleep, but your brain is wired, right? So
yeah,
I think, that has kind of, in my experience, given me a lot of exposure around what's going on and what moves, what ticks. And then when you hold conversations with people, they understand that you understand technology, you understand their pain points, and conversations lead to growth.
I see. Awesome. A mixture of, technical capabilities and business acumen.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's easier said than done. But we have to create time for it, right?
I see. Yeah. So speaking of growth, a lot of people think of climbing the corporate ladder, moving into leadership positions as well. So are there any specific strategies or actions that perhaps, professionals can take to position themselves for, leadership opportunities and be ready for that, basically?
Yeah. So a few things come to mind. I think one is a classic one. Always have a mentor, right? And that's what I I experienced as well, and not just one mentor. It's to be able to find, a number of different mentors, and that doesn't mean meeting with them every week and having an agenda of topics, right? So it can be a lot more organic. But my one advice, even with that piece, is if I'm an engineer, finding a mentor doesn't necessarily mean that I find someone who has, more years of experience in the same field. That's important. And it's important to get advice from them. But a mentor really is, someone that gives you an outside-in perspective, right? And so find mentors in your organization or even outside your organization. So if I come from an insurance industry, right? I found mentors that were outside of tech in the business.
How do you meet them?
That's a good question. So, it can be any number of ways.
Yeah.
Right? It requires, I think, a little bit of stepping out of your comfort zone.
Okay.
To be willing to engage in conversation, right? It depends in the environment you work in, right? So if you're a small organization, then everyone sits on the same floor or maybe sits on in the same building, and so there might be company events and you meet them like that, right? Or the company has programs to connect mentors, right? Where you can say, this is what I'm looking for. So most big organizations do that, but that's within a company, so that's still the safe zone. Right? Stepping out would be, in the city you're living in or in the industry that you're in, there's a ton of content online, but a ton of groups online that meet and connect. And I remember when I first came to Singapore, I was very lonely. And so the first week I was going to work and I was coming out. So I went online and I was meeting, I forget the Google search, but meet tech professionals in Singapore or something like that. Linked and followed through. Found a Reddit page that had a WhatsApp number for a WhatsApp group. And this is 7 years ago. No one publishes their number anymore. Because, a lot of
PDPA.
Yeah, or PDPA, right? And I was like, okay, this is cool. But it didn't feel good, just trying to. It's I have no friends. I'm trying to make friends or talk to people. But you kind of have to push yourself to do that. And the first meeting I went to, I was telling someone at work, I'm like, hey, I found this thing, and I'm going there, and they were like, yeah, these meetings are useless, and it's a waste of time. I'm like, I'll still go, right? And I went there, and I had this image in my mind that's going to be boring, and everyone's just going to sit there, and people were just sitting there having dinner, nothing fancy about it. But I met a lot of cool people, right? A few people in insurance.
Yeah.
And then that first event happened. Everyone goes away. It's still a struggle the second time if someone's organizing, okay, let's go. So you kind of have to push yourself to go. And I made very meaningful connections out of that afterwards. And it's really, you can approach it like building friends, right? Yeah. It's not really going in with an agenda that, hey, I want to learn about this from you, because it has to be organic relationship, right? And then those are the most genuine mentor-mentee relationships, because then once the friendship is there or the relationship is there, then you can discuss anything that comes to mind, right? Just if I'm facing some trouble, I go to my friends and I ask them for advice. So that's what a mentor should be, and so that's one important aspect of this. The other is, I would recommend, and we find this often in the tech industry with tech professionals. I went through this, is what's my career path, right? So I started as a software tester. I was like, okay, maybe, I want to become a software developer, took that on. And then I would always think okay, next step is senior software developer, then, tech lead, then maybe an architect or manage a team of developers, right? And so we often look for defined career paths and try to align behind it.
Yeah.
Because you'll find most people in tech more logically oriented or logical thinking, right? Because that's what programming is about.
Yeah.
And so as much as we should do that, I think if we're asking the question, how do we get into leadership roles? If you ask a lot of leaders, most of them will say they never followed a defined career path, right? You don't go from a developer to a senior developer to a tech lead to an architect to a team manager to a CIO.
Yeah.
You'll find CIOs that have done that, but more often than not, you'll find CIOs that are coming from many different backgrounds, right? We used to have a CIO that was a mechanical engineer working in the insurance industry, right? And so what's very important is, as I was mentioning earlier, like diversification of the experience, right? And there's no one straight path. So trying to get to a leadership role, as much as it's important to go through the job families and the promotion cycles, always be open to a different experience. And whether as a developer, you end up taking a project management role as an assignment, even if you don't like doing it, right? But it's experience, and you might do it for 6 months and come back out, right? Or even like a different role outside of tech. That can depend on the company you're in. And once you get out of tech, can you come back into tech? So a lot of people think about that. But it's important to kind of diversify your experience. So
Yeah, absolutely. Those are really good points. Okay, so I'm sure, as a CIO yourself, you've seen several people move into leadership positions as well. What would you think are some of the key attributes or qualities that tech leaders look for when considering candidates for leadership positions?
Yeah, it's a good one. There's no perfect answer to this, but I'll try to summarize it. I think obviously having a foundation of the technology the domain that you're in is important, right? You often find sometimes leaders that are running an organization that are a bit out of touch with the technology. That can play out in a number of different ways. It doesn't make them a bad leader, but I think, in my opinion, like one of the good attributes, if we're considering people for leadership role, is make sure they have foundation of the tech work that happens on the ground, right? It doesn't mean that they have to be coding every day, but they need to understand the ins and outs.
That makes sense, right?
And that helps them relate to the layers in the organization, right? You don't want a leader that comes outside in just because they're good people managers, but are unable to understand the technical foundation. But that's an easy one to fulfill. Then the second is, you'll hear, okay, they should have people management skills, they should have experience. All those are valid points, but I think, in my opinion, the key one after the tech foundation is willingness to grow, right? And willingness to learn. And to your question earlier, like growth mindset, right? Even when someone becomes a leader, that's still their first step in the journey, right? And then they still go through, different leadership experiences, right? And I go through that, right? Like I took on a leadership role, governing architecture for the Eastern operations of Liberty, and that was just the first step, right? Then I got groomed into managing different projects. Then I got groomed into, shadowing CIOs and then taking on a CIO role, right? So keyword I'm using here is grooming, because leadership is very unique to a organization that is made up of the talent that they have, to their goals. So it's really about fit, right? There's no perfect leader you can get from the market. It's how they fit in the organization, the culture, and what they do, right? And so even a seasoned leader needs to be groomed into the role that they're being hired. And what I find is new leaders are easier to groom because they're hungry for knowledge, right? And so that's another criteria, is like willingness to learn, get out of your comfort zone, take on things that you're clearly not comfortable with or maybe not even interested in, but willingness to do that. So that's a key attribute to display when going for leadership roles or interviewing for them is, how much have you stepped out of your comfort zone? On top of the tech foundation. The third thing I'll add to that is leaders are there to guide teams and to achieve outcomes and to unblock hurdles, right?
Yeah.
And unblocking means you need to have a solution mindset. And what that means is if you see a risk, if you see a challenge, identifying that is only half the job, if not even less, right? Coming up with a solution for that is a leadership trait, right? And so what I've seen is, especially like if people are gearing towards leadership roles, is when they're raising challenges, they want to share a solution to that as well. Even if it's a bad solution, at least you're displaying that this is how I think, how to solve for a given challenge.
Absolutely. Those are really good points. And earlier you touched a little bit about your personal experience, so I want to go dig a little deeper there on your personal journey. So maybe, Qanit, please share a little bit more about how, you successfully transitioned from a technical role to a more of a leadership position in tech.
Yeah. It's a tough question. Because I think, everyone kind of has their journey and experiences. So happy to share. I think there's a number of different things as I reflect back that I can kind of share. One is basically, this, you have to kind of build a brand for yourself, as cliche as it sounds. And that goes back to like the earlier points I was making. You have to not just attain knowledge, but have meaningful conversations about that with people you interact, and not just in your scope of work or your line of work, right? And if we are in a organization where tech is an enabler, like Liberty or like insurance, right, where technology is enabling the business, then I think you'll agree, like, people that are not in IT, they'll just come to IT for all sorts of technologies, right? It's like,
I'm guilty of that.
Yeah. I cannot log on to the VPN, or I cannot do this, I cannot do that. Which is, it's great. It's a great opportunity for tech professionals, right? And when I was more junior in my career, we used to laugh about it. We would say, so in university, like, I did a part-time job and it was help desk. Right?
Oh, okay.
And we had a professor who filed a ticket, and this is a true story, a very classic one, right? That their printer is not working. They were very, very angry that their printer is not working. And you can guess, like, it wasn't plugged in properly. The classic example, right? But I think that was many, many years ago, but I think the world is a lot more tech savvy today, right? So not to say that people outside of tech don't understand tech, but what I mean to say is have intelligent conversations about what's up and coming about tech, and building that knowledge base and how that relates with who you're talking to solve their problems, right? And that builds a brand about yourself. So even if the company's executive leader comes and asks you why, something is not working, and if it's not your role, it doesn't matter. Engage with them, right? And connect them to who you think can help solve their problem. And that comes with building a brand, right, in the organization that you're in. If you're looking for, growing into leadership positions in the company that you're part of. And that's been my experience, right? I've done 12 plus years at Liberty, and kind of, been groomed through that process. The other piece is managing up, right? And it's a tactful balance. It doesn't mean that you're just trying to appease your boss or just doing what they're doing. It really means understand what is your manager's outcomes, right? And what are they trying to achieve? And make sure that that translates to how you're supporting that, right? And then that comes with, more opportunities where, if people get a chance to interact with senior leadership, like managers, right? Take on that opportunity and share what is being done at your team's level. What are the challenges? And so that's some of what I went through. I think it depends on how a company is organized and how it's cultured as well. But at Liberty, we have a lot of matrix structure. And so you have managers, but then you have dotted line managers, and then you have like senior leaders, and it's really encouraged to kind of go deep and up as well, where you provide access to employees in your company to interact with senior leaders, right? And if my advice is if people find themselves in a company that encourages that, capitalize on it, right? And have your brand, sell yourself, that this is what I have to offer, not just in the hard skills, but also in the soft skills. And like, this is how I critically think about stuff. This is how I approach solutioning. And the last piece is experience. You have to diversify, as I was mentioning, right? And you often find talent that is good at something, and they are very good at it, and they're doing a critical piece of the process. Maybe they're maintaining a critical application, for example, right? And they know the ins and outs of that. They're getting rewarded for that. They win all sorts of recognition. But let's say they've been doing it for 5 years, right? And so that's when, like, as a tech professional, you have to kind of take a step back and say, am I getting out of this job or this role what I'm putting in? Or have I plateaued, right? And even though you might be getting a lot of recognition and a lot of praise and maybe even good comp, but do I need to step out and do something that is unfamiliar with me, right? And taking on those roles, and even if it's the same role but a different location. So in my example, I was craving travel, but that came with an advantage as well. Is I went to different areas of the company, saw how they worked, right, and how they approached solutions, and kind of, built my presence there, and then went to another assignment somewhere else and built that. And that not only helps diversify my experience, but it also kind of helps me then understand the global culture of the company, and then be able to navigate where to go after that, right?
I feel like that's really helpful, right? Because different regions might be doing things differently. And then you have like a more holistic picture of the entire business. That's really helpful. So I guess 3 main pointers together from what you've just mentioned. I guess, first of all, don't be a wallflower. Second, build your damn branding. And third, diversify your experiences. Yeah, great.
Absolutely.
So what would you say, maybe on a not so green side of the grass, what would be some challenges or obstacles that professionals will face when they try to, take on leadership role?
Yeah, and it's a good question. There's, again, like, everyone is going to have different challenges as they're taking leadership roles, right? One of the most common ones is leaders have, there's this, the word is overloaded sometimes, right? There is a high requirement to become a leadership, to attain a leadership position, right? So I think sometimes the biggest challenge is, as tech professionals that are aspiring to become leaders, they put the leader on a pedestal, the term leader on a pedestal, right? And it's kind of an oxymoron, because a leader should be above and guiding, right? But if you put that, if you have that mindset, then you're kind of self-actualizing against reaching that, or making it too far out to reach, right? So So there's a journey of that sometimes can become a challenge where it seems unattainable, and so it needs to be kind of humanized, that a leadership role is an organic role that you gain with experience. But that's just only one small part of it, right? The other is obviously experience is a critical requirement for leadership. And now, if a CEO is hiring a CIO, they may say you need X years of experience. If a CIO is hiring a tech lead, they may say you need Y years of experience, right? And everyone has their criteria, and they're all different, right? There's no perfect level of experience that's available, but as a tech professional, you kind of have to navigate that for what your senior leaders expect out of you to become a leader, right? And I had, as I've been fortunate enough to have had accelerated growth with my company, and that comes with not just, obviously I didn't accumulate years and years of experience, but I was able to make sure that I accumulate enough experience to be able to prove back that, hey, I understand this domain and I can play this role, whether it was going from a senior engineer to an architect, for example. That journey can be a long journey for a lot of people, that they will spend 5, 8, sometimes even 10 years being a really good senior engineer, and then eventually take on an architect role. Or you could start playing the architect role without being an architect, right? And prove it to other architects around you that, hey, I can deliver on this, and I can fulfill what's demanded of a software architect, and prove that you can do it in the absence of years of experience. So that's something that typically needs to be navigated, because it can become a challenge where if people don't know you, they don't know that you can deliver on something without the credentials for it, right? And so that will be a challenge that comes in different ways and shapes and forms. It's a challenge I've faced, but it's something that you kind of then have to see, okay, whose perception is what, and how do I help change that perception by showing what I can bring to the table, right? So those would be the two main challenges I think that leaders go through.
I see. Yeah, definitely. I absolutely agree. Years of experience doesn't mean that you can do a certain job well as well, and sometimes people just pick up things, learn faster, accelerated their learning curve, and they're able to do things that, someone with 5 years of experience could do do the job of someone with 15 years of experience, for example.
Exactly, or even better, right?
Yeah.
And in tech, that's a key thing, because if you have someone that has 20 years of experience in a programming language, that language is probably obsolete.
Yeah, probably rusty.
Yeah, and so tech changes so fast that you kind of have to navigate diversity, exposure, and just the right amount of experience. And a good way that I've practiced, and I got this advice from someone, was be in a role long enough until you're extracting output from the role, which is more than what you're putting in, right? And when it comes to a point where you're putting in a lot of energy, you're still getting out of the role, like experiences and new firefighting that you're doing or new projects, but is that enough for what you're putting in? Or do you need a new challenge where you go to a brand new area and start experiencing that? And that's a good trigger point to switch, basically.
I see. Well, really insightful. So to end off, maybe advice from Qanit. How can professionals navigate imposter syndrome or self-doubt that might hinder fast track of career progression?
Yeah, that's a very key one. So I've been playing the CIO role for the past 10 months now. My career aspiration was to get into executive IT roles, and so when I was asked to step in as an interim CIO, it did feel like an imposter syndrome.
Surreal, right?
Yeah, in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
And there's no easy way to kind of quell that, right? And so I remember I was thrown into like a mid-planning season, right? Where you're doing a lot of budgeting, a lot of financial planning, looking at what the next year is about. And I had always been part of that, but on the sidelines before, right? Where I had assisted other CIOs, or I was an architect, am an architect by trade, an engineer. But when something, obviously as a CIO, you need to be very financially focused. So when something like this becomes the first job at hand, you can feel like, you can feel the imposter syndrome, and you can self-doubt, am I doing this correctly or am I not? And I went through that. And so two things to keep in mind. One is, if you were nominated to play a role, or you were hired to play a role, as I was nominated to be an interim CIO, someone saw something in you that they believed you could do it, right? So that's a conditioning I had to do, where, hey, it's overwhelming, there can be a lot, but like, I'm here because there must have been something, right? And I think obviously there had but it's a good reminder to condition yourself with that, right? And then using that to kind of believe in yourself, right? And continue to remind that, hey, I can do this. I'm walking into this meeting. I think I know about A, B, and C, but I have no idea what's going to be thrown at me, right? And you can be thrown X, Y, and Z, right? But just believe in yourself. If you can't do it, say, hey, I'm new to the role. Let me go and find out, right? Rather than reacting in a way where someone might start perceiving that they cannot do it, right? And so sometimes it can be nerve-wracking. So you have to kind of like take a step back, take a deep breath, believe in yourself, ask for time. And then go back and do your homework, or ask other people for advice, right? And you do that. I did that, a number of times. And the first month was very hard. Second month became easier. The third month became even easier. And then it starts becoming a natural thing, where you start then understanding how things work. And then the self-doubt does kind of turn into self-confidence.
Well, that's really inspiring.
Yeah, but it's a journey everyone has to take on themselves, right?
Definitely. Someone definitely sees something in you, right? Okay, great. All right, we will leave it here, as that's all the time that we have for today. I want to take this opportunity to thank Qanit for providing his insight and knowledge to this topic, and thank you everyone for listening. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.
Thank you for having me. Goodbye.